I selected coffee to research because it is my favorite thing to drink. My favorite types of coffees are lattes, mochas, and cappuccinos. Over the past 2 months, I have spent roughly $400 on coffee at least 5 different shops. Because I consume so much coffee, I am very interested in the ecological impact it has and if I am hurting the environment by drinking it so often. If it turns out that coffee is not being produced sustainably, I would be willing to limit my consumption of it. In the United States, about 50 to 56% of the population, which is roughly 150 million Americans, consume coffee. As of 2016, there were approximately 24,000 coffee shops nationwide, and this number is projected to increase in the years to follow. The drinks consumed include espresso, cappuccino, latte, and black coffee. The United States is in fact the 8th leading consumer of coffee worldwide. The raw materials involved in making coffee are typically just water, milk, and most importantly, coffee beans. Many other ingredients can be added to enhance flavors, but I find it best to focus on the main materials involved in producing coffee. Water is definitely a renewable resource due to the constant presence of the water cycle. In the United States, water comes from a variety of sources. These sources include, but are not limited to, private wells, desalination, water reclamation, and reservoirs. Milk is also a renewable resource due to the fact that it is an indirect product of photosynthesis. Milk is typically produced on dairy farms. Modern dairy farms can hold hundreds to thousands of cows. Female cows are constantly impregnated by artificial insemination in order to produce milk. Usually, cows are treated with hormones that increase milk production. Selective breeding has even been implemented to allow for stronger milk production. Cows are mostly fed grain instead of grass due to the cheaper cost. Cows can produce milk for up to 305 days a year. While this is great news for the milk industry, the cows suffer tremendously. Once the milk is produced, it is then heated or pasteurized to eliminate diseases. Today, the United States is the largest producer of cow milk in the world. Coffee beans are also considered a renewable resource because it is an indirect product of photosynthesis. Coffee beans are grown on Arabica trees and Robusta trees, which are typically located between the tropics of Cancer. The leading countries in coffee production are Brazil, Vietnam, Colombia, Indonesia, and Ethiopia. These trees are typically planted and grown in the mountains. Most coffee beans must be picked by hand. This means they require a lot of labor to harvest. Coffee can either be strip-picked, meaning all the cherries containing seeds are stripped from a tree at one time, or selectively picked, which means only the ripe cherries are picked. Coffee beans are processed in one of 2 ways. The first is the dry method, in which coffee is spread out on large surfaces in order to dry in the sun. This is usually done when a country has limited resources of water. The second method is the wet method, in which the pulp is removed from the cherries so that only the skin is left on by a pulping machine. Next, the beans are separated by weight as they pass through water channels. Then, the beans are separated and transferred to the water-filled fermentation tanks to remove mucilage from the coffee beans. After that, the beans are rinsed and dried. The beans are then hulled, which means the husks are removed. They're polished and sorted by size, weight, and amount of imperfections. Finally, the beans are loaded onto a ship and exported to different countries. The average consumption among coffee drinkers is 3.1 cups of coffee per day. This is about equal to 66 billion cups of coffee consumed each year. It is important to address the amount of water that goes into producing and processing coffee. According to a recent study, 37 gallons of fresh water go into making just 1 single cup of coffee. This study suggests that using the wet or dry process of coffee production really does not make a large difference in the amount of water used. This is because the water used in the wet production is only 0.34% of the total amount of water used to get the coffee beans. This is because it takes a large amount of water to grow the Arabica and Robusta trees that yield the coffee beans. Although wet processing does not use much more water than dry processing, it does pollute a large amount of water. Therefore, the dry process should be preferred to the wet process. Also, it is important to address the amount of energy used in the production of coffee. 60% of the total amount of energy used in the production of coffee is attributed to transport, roasting, and brewing of coffee. Due to the fact that coffee is not usually consumed where it is produced, a massive amount of energy is used during transportation and shipping. Roasting is another part of the process of coffee beans that uses a large amount of energy. This is because roasting machines must reach the high temperatures of 550 degrees Fahrenheit. This machine uses over 1 million British thermal units of energy each hour. To put that number in a perspective, a gas stove only uses 7,000 British thermal units of energy per hour for each burner. The total energy used to produce 1 cup of coffee is about 1.94 megajoules, which is a very high amount. After calculating the PAT equals I equation, the total impact of coffee in the United States alone is 902,100,000. The long-term impact of coffee production on the environment does not appear to be good. With coffee comes a significant amount of resource degradation. To begin, coffee bean farmers have been encouraged to replace traditional farming methods with higher yielding techniques. This has resulted in the loss of over 2.5 million acres of forest in Central America alone. Deforestation is sadly a common result of coffee production and is putting Latin and Central America's high biodiversity at stake. In addition, coffee production results in the contamination of waterways. Organic pollutants from the coffee plant itself pollutes many rivers. These pollutants can cause eutrophication of water systems, which allows the water to have insufficient oxygen for the organisms living there. In addition, there is a significant amount of waste produced during the manufacturing of coffee. The process of separating the beans from the coffee cherries generates a large amount of waste. The waste pollutes water, soil, and many fragile ecosystems. From this information, one can conclude that the current production methods of coffee are not very sustainable. A more sustainable method of production is shade-grown coffee. In this method, the coffee beans grow beneath forest trees. With this method of cultivation, the coffee plantations provide the best habitat for birds and other fauna. In addition, having vegetation among the coffee plants reduces the need for herbicide. This is very feasible, but there are limitations. These limitations are that many coffee farmers are unwilling to do this, less coffee beans can be produced, and the process is often more expensive. Another thing that can be done to reduce the impact of coffee is reusing the waste products. The coffee pulp can replace up to 20% of cattle feed, which increases the sustainability of coffee. On the consumer level, many things can be done to reduce the environmental impact of coffee. As a consumer, you can purchase coffee beans associated with the fair trade and beans that are known to be produced sustainably. In addition, you could use reusable mugs, opt for organic milk options, and recycle paper cups when possible. Drinking coffee less often and choosing other, more sustainable drinks can also help you lessen your personal impact. What surprised me the most about the production of coffee was the amount of energy required to produce it and the amount of pollution the whole process emits. In the future, I do plan on limiting my consumption of coffee but not cutting it out completely. I will only purchase coffee that is associated with the fair trade, and I will look into the sustainability of the beans that local businesses make their coffee with. I am not willing to completely cut out coffee from my diet because I really enjoy it, but I am willing to look into ways to make my usage of it more sustainable. I am willing to take steps to cure affluenza, but at this point, I believe finding a cure is near impossible. Personally, after completing this project and learning information from AP Environmental Science, I am beyond willing to make a change in my own lifestyle in order to use resources more sustainably, and I am willing to educate more people about sustainable usage of resources.